What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another exciting episode here on the channel. Lately I've been getting a lot of questions regarding what terminal tackle that I personally use. So that's like hooks, split rings, what snaps that I use, and stuff along those lines. So today I'm pretty much going to be doing a video on what I personally use and recommend if you guys are getting into swim bait fishing. So if you guys are ready, let's get right into today's video. Okay, so we're probably going to just start with the most popular one, and that's obviously what hooks that I personally use. Throughout the years of throwing swim baits, I've tried multiple different hooks from different companies, and I've kind of settled in with like 3 or 4 hooks that I use on the regular. If you guys have been a part of the channel for a bit of time, you guys know that I'm a huge believer in the Decoy Quad hooks. Pretty much all sizes of the Decoy Quattro XS21 hooks I've used, from their smallest size, which is a size 2, all the way up to their 1/0 size. I wish they made a bigger one for some like those larger baits like the Mother, but those size hooks work perfectly on pretty much every single bait that I've ever fished them on. I love those quads. They're not obviously the most perfect hooks, like the smaller sizes, like the size 2 and the size 1. Every now and then you might get some that will bend out on you, but I mean, they're kind of on the lighter wire for like an actual hook. But that 1/0, it's pretty strong. It'll most likely break before it bends. So if you really want the strongest hook, you'd want to go with that 1/0. Now, a lot of people throughout the years, they've always said that it's a small hook, and that's true. Like the 1/0 quad is smaller than like a normal 1/0 like ST36. But since it has those 4 prongs on there, I think your area of bite is pretty much the same, if not a little bit larger on those quads. So I've always loved the hookup ratio on those quads. I know some guys don't like them. I've heard some horror stories about the quads from other people before, but personally for me, I love quads. It's my go-to hook for pretty much every single one of my baits that has a treble hook on it. Now, the other hook though that my buddy Chris Purcell from Swimbaits Underground put me on were the hooks that I use pretty much like on my hard baits only, and that is these Owner ST35s. Now, the reason why I think these ST35s are great is that they're light wire, they're fairly thin, and what's cool is when they suck up to the bait, they sit nice and flat on that belly. Just because of how this hook is made, it's got this very flat side with one hook sticking out from the bottom, really. So the hookup ratio on these hooks, I think, are fantastic. They're strong. I haven't really had them bend out. They do dull out pretty quick, but I think that's just any regular old hook, especially if you're fishing around rocks or any hard structure, they're gonna dull out your hooks. So when they're sharp, these hooks are fantastic and I love them. I pretty much have them on a lot of my hard baits nowadays, just because sometimes those quads can be hard to find, and so far I really like those ST35s. They're a lot easier to find. Now, if I'm not using ST35s and if I get a bait in that comes with Owner ST36s, those are fantastic hooks. They've always been great. Super sharp hooks, strong, readily available at all times. And I think overall, they're a really, really good hook. If you're just wanting to get one hook that will do it all at all different sizes too, the Owner ST36 is probably the way to go. It's a fantastic hook. Okay, so from hooks, let's go over to split rings. And I pretty much use 2 to 3 sizes of split rings. It just depends on the size of the swim bait that I'm using, but for the most part I've been using some Decoy split rings. I use a 60-pound as well as a 75-pound, size 5 and size 6. I think both of these, they fit on pretty much any swim bait that I personally use, from, you know, the Tiny Clash all the way up to like the Depths 250. I would probably use the 60-pound. And then for like the Hinkle, the Mother, any of those larger baits, I'd jump up to the bigger 65 size. And that's basically it. Obviously, there's tons of other split rings out there, like the Owner split rings. I wouldn't go below 50 pound on split rings. I've, again, seen some pretty horrible stories of split rings being bent out by these giant fish. You want to get strong ones, but you also want them to kind of stay a little bit on the smaller side so it doesn't affect the swim of some of these baits that can be delicate to weight from hooks and split rings attached. So kind of keep that in mind. And then another one that a lot of people ask me about is what snaps that I use. And again, it goes back to obviously the size of the bait that I'm fishing. So if I'm fishing a smaller bait that's under like 8 inches, I'll usually go with like a 3 or a 4 size Decoy Egg Snap. And then obviously for my larger baits like the Hinkle, the Mother, or the Ghost, or anything like that, I'm jumping up to the size 5 Decoy Egg Snap. Again, I've heard horror stories about egg snaps opening up on people. I personally never had it happen. I think the majority of people like these egg snaps, and for me, they work fantastic. They're great, they're strong, they come in a lot of packs. So the reason why I use a snap is for extra movement out of a glide bait. It just lets that bait pivot a little bit better. I know some guys will literally just tie that snap on there, and then they'll open the snap, put a bait on there, and then maybe fish that bait for like an hour. They're not feeling that bait, open that snap back up, put another bait on there, and what you're doing is you're just wearing out that snap more and more that you open it. So eventually those snaps will become weaker over time if you keep opening them and closing them. So what will happen is, you know, you do this 6 or 7 times and you go through quite a few different trips with it, that thing is going to be weak. That snap is going to be weak. So one of those times you might go to cast and the snap just opens up and breaks because it's so loose, or you hook into a fish and that snap just rips open because it's so weak. So again, what I do is I just leave my snaps on the baits. I always recommend people just retying. I know it's a pain in the ass for some guys to, you know, take 5 minutes to retie something, but I'm telling you, in the long run, just retying is worth it. I mean, you might have a nick in your line that you didn't know about because you're just, you know, snapping open and snapping it off, and eventually, boom, the line snaps. I think that's probably the most important thing, is just always retying. And obviously, I can always say these things. Some people are going to kind of brush it off, but it's pretty much until you experience snapping a bait off or breaking off on a fish that it'll get lodged in your mind like, okay, I've gone like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours without retying. I'm just gonna retie just to make sure that I haven't hit anything, or my line's not nicked up or shaved or anything like that. So nowadays I retie consistently just because I've snapped off so many baits just from me going so long without retying. I think it's probably the most important thing ever. But Owner also makes some great snaps as well. There's a bunch of different snaps out there on the market, but kind of just like the split rings, there's a certain size that you kind of don't want to go below. I'd say like 60, 70 pound. You don't want to go anywhere below that, or else those things will be kind of weak, especially when you're fishing some of those larger swim baits. Okay, so we're going to kind of move on to some niche type of terminal tackle that I personally use. So one of those that I really like using on floating swim baits, and I've kind of talked about it in the past before, but I use like a Zappu board weight. They make them in, you know, different sizes. I just so happen to like the 2 gram because I like to put these on like my clash baits that float, or really any bait that I want to be like a super suspending or like a slow sink from being a floater. All you do is you peel one of the sides, you stick it on there, you make sure it's on there, and it's gonna stay on there. Even with the hooks like rashing it up, it's gonna stay on there. You actually have to kind of forcefully take it off, and again, you can take them off. So if you're fishing an area that has grass and the grass is like, you know, 8 foot below the surface or whatever, you can put some of these board weights on your floating swim baits or whatever just to sink them out there. And then, you know, later in the season when that grass comes up, you know, a little bit higher, you can obviously just take off the board weight and it becomes that floater again. So I really like those board weights. If you can find them, I really recommend you picking some up. They're really great. And then another one, speaking of adding weight to something, I've been adding nail sinkers a lot to my soft baits just to get those things to be a little bit heavier. So when I am fishing, you know, 30, 40, maybe even 50 foot, it gets down there to the bottom. And now that it's a little bit heavier, I'm able to actually fish that bait a little bit faster. I pretty much picked up this tip from Mike Gilbert with like the battle shads. So pretty much all of my battle shads and citizens, they have nail weights up in the cheek, so they're a little bit heavier, so I'm able to really get it down on the bottom, and I'm able to work it a little bit faster while maintaining contact bottom. I like the Reins a lot. Lunker City also makes some nice ones as well. They come in a bunch of different sizes. I recommend for some like those larger baits like the 7.5 battle shad, the 7-inch citizen, or the 9-inch battle shad, I'd go with like the smallest would be like an 8-ounce for something like that. I like the nail ones because these are tungsten, so they're a little bit smaller, where these ones from Lunker City, they're lead, they're gonna be a little bit longer, so they might be sticking out a little bit more. So if you can find the Reins, since they are tungsten, they're gonna be a little more expensive, but they're still not that expensive. They're like $5-6 for a pack. So if you can find these, I really recommend it. If you guys want to fish on the bottom a little bit faster, where guys, for the most part, they're really having to creep that bait to keep that bottom contact. Okay, another niche one, but my buddy Kazuki kind of put me on, was actually adding a grenade sinker to a floating bait, or a bait that's kind of like a suspending bait. And what you do is you can add this grenade weight. You can add the grenade weight actually to the back of the hook hanger on the bait. So like with these clash baits, a lot of times they'll sit like this. So then when you put that grenade weight here in the back, it kind of just levels it out. And you kind of get different actions when you add that weight in the back, or even in the front sometimes. It'll do different things and swim just slightly different once you start adding different weights. So the same thing with these grenade sinkers. You can find them in a ton of different sizes. So like on my Clash Ghost, I've got one of those grenade sinkers here in the back. And before, the bait sits like this. And now it sits a little more level, so it's a little bit easier to glide. And you can add lighter weight, you can add more weight, you can add weight here in the front so it's more nose heavy. You can do so many different things with those grenade weights. I really like using them, so huge shout out to KZ for putting me on those grenade weights. I think they're really dope. Okay, this one's super nichey, and this is really only for depths guys. So this can apply to obviously the OG depths 250s. It should also be able to apply to the new styles. This can also apply to the bull shooters. Technically, it can really apply to anything that has a slot somewhere that you can put weight. So with the depths 250s, come stock, they come with lead weights and a slot here and a slot down here. On a Silent Killer 250, this front slot is actually empty, so it becomes a floater. What guys will do is they'll buy that Silent Killer, take off the skin, take off the bill, and what some guys will do is they'll look for those lead weights. Sometimes they can be hard to find, so I just go down to my local Hobby Lobby and pick up tungsten putty. And with that tungsten putty, is all you do is you just fit it into that slot, and you can kind of create how the sink is on a specific bait. So this is where that customization of a 250 can come into handy. So if you want one that, you know, if you get like a stock one and it's got both those lead weights, you can take out one of those lead weights and you can put in tungsten putty and it can be like a floater. Or you can take out that lead, put it in more tungsten putty so it weights it down a little bit more, and that might be able to fix some of those ones that, you know, just so happen to nose up. But that tungsten putty, it's a fantastic way to convert some of your baits, especially with the depths, just because they have the slots. That's the only real reason that I use tungsten putty, is if I want to buy a Silent Killer OG 250 for a little bit cheaper price, I can just convert it myself, use that tungsten putty, and make it into my slow sinking slide swimmer. So you guys should definitely check it out. if you guys are converting or you want to change out the weights on your 250s, try tungsten putty. It'll change your mind. And moving on, we have one that, you know, a lot of guys should know, but when it comes down to my soft baits, I really like having stingers on them. So this just so happens to be the Megabass Mag Draft, the 10-inch version. I love this bait. I've caught a lot of fish on it. And what I've done is I've added a stinger from this hook hanger down here at the bottom, all the way back here, just in front of this back fin. Now, what a lot of guys will ask is like, well, how does that hook just stay there? And what I've done is I've actually taken a paper clip. I've just taken a small paper clip like this. I'll grab some dikes, and what I'm doing is I'm just making a cut. It's probably almost in the middle of this small paper clip. I'll cut it, and what you have is this right here. Maybe like 3/4 of an inch long paper clip. And what you do with this is, let's just take this Magnum, and without it, obviously the hook just comes up and down. But what I do is I place my hook there, I grab the paper clip, and all that I do is just put the opening around the shaft of the hook, push down into the plastic, and boom, it sits there. Doesn't come out. And then every now and then what I'll do is I will actually grab some pliers and I'll just kind of squeeze this paper clip just a little bit. And then just press it around, make sure that it's good and in there, and boom. You have a perfectly placed stinger here in the back. Prongs are not going into the bait. And what that does, it just preserves the bait. Instead of having one of those prongs constantly ripping out and making a giant hole, you just got two little prongs going into the bait from that paper clip. And then when you get bit, all it does is just pops out and boom, you're free to go. So obviously it's a nice cheap alternate. You can obviously buy a pack of paper clips for like $3, and you just cut them, make them, put them in a little baggie, have them ready, so anytime that you need to pull out a paper clip, if it does just so happen to come out or you catch a fish, you can just get a new one, put it in, and you're ready to go again. And so yeah, that's basically my terminal tackle. Obviously I just use regular old dikes, regular old pliers. If you guys are using soft baits, I recommend getting like Mended so you guys can patch up some of your baits. But other than that, that's pretty much basically what I always have in my boat while I'm out fishing, just in case something happens or I need to adjust anything on the fly. I have pretty much all this stuff in a bag ready to go whenever I need it. So when I'm out there on the water, I don't have to scramble or have to completely switch out baits to something different. I can just adjust on the fly. So if you guys have any other questions about some of the terminal tackle that we talked about today, leave me a comment down below and I'll try and get to it. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, go out there and chase your dreams.